This is Breaking the News Plus on this Tuesday night. I'm Janice Shortle. We are in Supreme Court decision season, and today marks the final day, and they usually leave the biggest ones for last of their current session. To join me today, expert on the court, Tim Johnson from the University of Minnesota. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Jana.
We've seen a lot of you in the last couple of days on the Breaking the News newscast, both in the Linear Project and here online, and that's for a very specific reason. It's decision season for the Supreme Court of the United States, and today the two big ones came down, probably the biggest one of the term. Who should birthright citizenship continue? It's in our 14th Amendment. It's the very first sentence, if you're born here, you are a United States citizen. And the court upheld that today. Is that surprising to you?
Not surprising at all. I mean, there are at least 5, if not 6 justices on the Supreme Court who strongly believe in originalism, or what we would call in political science, the reading the plain meaning of the words, and the words as you read them on the page say exactly what they mean. And as you point out, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment says if you were born here, you are a citizen here. I think the big surprise is that this was not a 9-0 or an 8-1 or at worst a 7-2 decision. The idea that this was a 5-4 decision and that some of the court's strongest textualists, or people who believe in the plain meaning of the words, dissented, I think may be the biggest surprise of the day.
Right, that it was so close, because there were people that thought it could possibly go 9-0. And when we talk about this, we do need to bring up that this was a decision that was very important to the Trump administration. They really wanted to win this one. Why is that, in terms of, is it just a part of their larger thoughts on what immigration should and shouldn't look like in the United States?
That's absolutely right, Jana. So it was part and parcel of the entire immigration agenda of the second term for President Trump. This was an executive order they signed within days of him taking the oath of office. And the idea would be not that the executive order would be employed retroactively, although I think there are some who believe that very well could have been the case, and that is anyone who had been born here from either illegal or legal immigrants, or people who just happened to be in the United States at the time that they gave birth, that those people would no longer be citizens. I think that would have been a very difficult way to enforce, almost impossible to enforce, but certainly the idea would be to enforce that going forward. You put that in conjunction with bans on people coming into the country from certain other nations. You put it in conjunction with stopping people from coming into the country to apply for visas. They have to stay out until they get here. All of this is part and parcel of the idea of making sure that the United States really closes its borders to immigrants as strongly as humanly possible. That is the goal, has been the goal of the Trump administration. This was just another part of it. And I will tell you, I'm not certain that this is the last that we will hear of birthright citizenship. Usually the Supreme Court has the final word. I think the administration will still try to fight to get rid of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment.
We've already seen inklings of what the administration wants. The president already called on Congress to pass some sort of legislation to do just that. But that was really my question. Beyond just the legislation piece of it, in terms of the legal system, in terms of the judiciary, does this 5-4 decision and any of the dissents that you read in it, do any of them somehow give a nod to how this could pass if it were brought in a different way? Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we know that justices all the time, and we know that this happens systematically, will send signals to Congress or signals to interest groups to say, here's how you might write a lawsuit in the future. Certainly there is some of that in Justice Gorsuch's dissent, and certainly in Justice Thomas's dissent as well, where they give them, they would give that side who wants to end birthright citizenship perhaps some new strategies on how they could make the argument. I'm not sure that they will fly, because when you've got this 5-person majority that includes the Chief Justice as well as Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is one of the younger justices on the bench, even though it's a 5-4, that's a pretty strong 5-person majority to say, there's no other way to interpret the 14th Amendment. There's Supreme Court precedent from 1898, a case that I've talked about in KARE 11 before, the Wong Kim Ark case. And there's also the files and the diaries of people who were there crafting the 14th Amendment. And so no matter how you spin it in Justice Thomas's dissent or Justice Gorsuch's dissent or elsewhere, it is almost impossible to read those words in Section 1 and come to any other conclusion that if you are born here, you are a citizen here.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to another case decided today. The Supreme Court sided with states that have laws in place that bar transgender girls from competing in girls' sports. We want to say on the front end, in Minnesota, trans girls, this doesn't affect us. We don't have that same ban, but 27 states do. And the Supreme Court, the highest court, said you can bar transgender girls from competing in girls' sports. Talk about if this one was close. Talk about what you know.
Yeah, so this was, you can say close or not. 6-3 is close these days, right? Because there's only 3 justices in the liberal bloc in the court. And so this was the classic 6-3 majority, 3 of President Trump's appointees, 3 other Republican appointees, and then the 3 democratically appointed justices in dissent. And Justice Kavanaugh writes in his majority opinion that, in fact, Title IX is not violated by banning transgender athletes by playing women's sports in high school, if that's what a state would like to decide. And then also said that transgender athletes do not have their equal protection violated when they are banned from playing sports. And the reason for that specifically is that being transgender is not a suspect class, meaning you don't get heightened scrutiny by the court, and the state has a higher burden of proving that they're doing something legitimate if they're taking away your rights. What Kavanaugh says is that gender, or what you would say is your sex at birth, is a protected right and under the 14th Amendment, and that's not being violated here. And so it really is this argument that says there's no equal protection violation, there's no Title IX violation, and if states would like to go ahead and ban transgender athletes from playing women's sports, then they can certainly do so. In other words, just like with reproductive health, the court is at least insinuating for the time being that this can and will be left up to the states.
This will be a states issue. That's a good parallel so people can think back on what happened with states' rights in terms of abortion. So when you talk about that, in the state of Minnesota, we don't have such a ban. So does this decision make it more likely, less likely, not likely at all that we could see legal challenges come up in Minnesota again on this issue?
I think it makes it more likely. I think we'll continue to see those issues or those cases simply because I think that fight from the side of women's sports will not stop. I think you saw some pretty clear reactions from that side about how happy they were with this case. But what the side of this issue that wants to make sure that there is a full-scale ban on transgender athletes from playing women's sports, what they would like is for the court to say that there is a 14th Amendment violation, but here's the difference. It's not an equal protection violation for those who are transgender athletes. It's an equal protection violation against those who are female by birth, and they don't want other people coming in to play their sports with them. In essence, their equal protection rights are being violated. Those cases are percolating around the federal court system as we speak. Obviously, well, some might be from Minnesota. I don't know that for sure or not. But what we know is I think this is probably the next step in the Supreme Court taking a case and saying maybe we can put a federal ban on transgender athletes playing women's sports and no longer leave it up to the states.
Right. To go one step further in terms of that argument. I agree with you. I think that this goes, further than this, and we'll see what happens next term. In terms of all the decisions we've seen come out over the last couple of weeks, the bigger ones again coming towards the end, which decision or decisions have you come across that you think, you know what, Americans should actually be thinking about this one? It's not going to get the headlines, it's not going to get the clickbait, but what out there really stands out to you, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the case that Ken Erdahl and I talked about yesterday, the Chaudhry case on geofences, I think people are talking about it. And I know that KARE 11 ended up getting a whole lot of views on YouTube for this, but I don't think it's getting near the press that it should. This is a clear protection on Fourth Amendment rights for the criminally accused. And this is a decision that comes from a very conservative court. And I think that people need to be thinking about this only for the reason that all of us carry around location devices with us almost 24/7. So I think people need to think about Chaudhry in some sense. A little bit more even than we've been talking about it. I think that the two cases on presidential power need to be talked about even more. I think that they were subsumed already by the transgender athletes case and the birthright citizenship case. But the two cases on a president's ability to fire people at what are meant to be independent executive agencies are very important cases. Of course, the court set out in the Cook case and said that's different. The president cannot. Right. The Federal Reserve is different. People cannot fire, or presidents can't fire commissioners from the Federal Reserve. But for all other executive agencies, the president now can fire with cause, and some might argue even without cause, anyone he would like to fire. And the problem with that is that there are so many people who work for administrations, whether Democratic or Republican presidents, who are what we term in political science lifers. They're not political appointees. They are there because they are studying a particular issue, whether it's the environment or space. They work at NASA, whether they are dealing with the Federal Trade Commission, whatever it might be. What the Slaughter case says in overturning an almost 100-year-old precedent is a president can fire anybody he would like. And of course, that will apply to all presidents going forward. But given President Trump's particular penchant for firing anyone who doesn't agree with him and putting in people who are only going to agree with him, that could have some pretty far-reaching consequences for how our government works going forward.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where you really, as the average person, you see the headline, you're like, what do I care about who gets fired at the FTC? But it does trickle down to you at some point. These agencies do affect your daily life. It just, you have to kind of connect the dots backwards. Well, Tim, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think that's absolutely right. And I tell my students when I teach these cases in constitutional law that they might come into the class thinking they're really boring, but they're going to come out of that class feeling exactly the same way that you just described, that when you start connecting the dots, there's certainly going to be effects on our lives or on the lives of all Americans.
And we've certainly seen that out of decisions with the Supreme Court in every which way in the last decade. Tim Johnson from the University of Minnesota, we thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for Breaking the News Plus. I'm Janice Shortle. We'll see you next time. Take care.